Welcome to the Women in the Arena podcast, a platform dedicated to honoring America's women veterans who dare greatly in all aspects of life. I'm your host, Sarah Scully. At Women in the Arena, we harness the power of storytelling to illuminate the human experience. Through authentic narratives, we honor the resilience, authenticity, and leadership of women who have served our country. Our name, Women in the Arena, pays homage to Theodore Roosevelt's legendary speech, The Man in the Arena, recognizing the remarkable contributions of women in traditionally male-dominated domains. Welcome back to another episode of the Women in the Arena podcast. Today's guest is Major Samantha Sliney, an accomplished attorney, policy advocate, and Air National Guard JAG officer with over a decade of experience in criminal law, administrative law, and national security. Throughout her career, Sam has led transformative policy campaigns focused around removing systemic barriers for servicewomen and military families, engaging directly with Congress, the Department of Defense, and leading nonprofits to drive real change. I am especially excited about this episode because it was born out of a connection made by one of our previous guests and an awesome person, Meg Tucker. I love when our community continues to multiply through authentic connections. It's my favorite, and we hope to keep that trend going. In this conversation, Sam and I dive into the history and purpose of the Women, Peace, and Security Initiative and address recent claims by United States Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth that he would dismantle the initiative within the DoD. We unpack the legality of these statements, the broader impact of sidelining this important framework, and the missed opportunities tied to its original intent. This episode ends with a powerful call to action and a reminder of how we can all remain tactful, composed, and united, even in the midst of political division. And we all know how hard that can be. We hope you enjoy this episode. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to our podcast so we can continue this impactful work. We appreciate your support. Sam, welcome. I'm so excited that we're here tonight. It's a Thursday night and we're both in our comfy clothes because we're getting ready to wind down, but I think it just highlights that so many women that we bring into these important conversations are juggling so many things. So you and I, finished the workday. I got my stuff done. I think you put some kids to bed and we're trying to do so many things at once while also kind of keeping up with the world around us and engaging in some really important conversations. But we're so excited that you're here and thank you for making the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited and been looking forward to this, especially given some of the events earlier this week with the topics we're going to talk about.
Yeah, me too. I think it's so cool how we met too in the context and the lens of how we've met. Lots of our guests that we've brought in have been through some great personal connections through previous guests. So we want to give a shout out to Meg Tucker for introducing us and recognizing that your voice really matters and brings so much insight to some of the things that we dive into and the things that we're passionate here at Iron Butterfly Media and at the Women in the Arena podcast. So shout out to Meg if you're listening. I'm going to send her this. Thanks for connecting us. But anyways, before we dive into the things that we want to talk about today, I would love for you to share with with our listeners just a little bit about you and your professional background. The first time we connected, I think the first things out of my mouth after you shared your story were, "Man, you've been pretty freaking busy. You've done some pretty awesome things." And have impacted so many important things. So if you could kind of share a piece of your professional journey and who you are.
Sure. So it all started, I went to law school, became a lawyer, and then joined the Air Force and really as a JAG, so a judge advocate or military attorney. And really that was all. I'm married to an active duty soldier. And he was jumping out of planes for a living, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool. I want to try that." Note: I never got to jump out of a plane while I was on active duty. Not that I'm complaining. I will say that I'm not upset I missed out on that opportunity. But anyways, that was kind of the catalyst. I don't come from a military family or anything like that, but I am married into the military. Came on to active duty as a JAG. I primarily did criminal law for the first 7 years. So I was a prosecutor. Later, I was a defense counsel. Obviously, had a during the time that I was doing that from like 2014 to 2019, 2021. Uh, my main caseload was sexual assault. And you've seen that, and I'm sure you've probably had guests talk about that topic and how it impacts the military. Well, that was my life. That's what I lived every day as a prosecutor and a defense counsel. My last active duty assignment, I actually got to serve in a special operations unit where I got to do more international and operational law, which was super cool. And that's actually where I started to dip my toes more into public policy, legislative advocacy, um, and governmental affairs is what some people call it. I had that privilege to volunteer with the Department of the Air Force Women's Initiatives team. Started that in 2019, working some policy changes and basically looking at, you know, what barriers exist for women in the DoD that need to be eliminated because they're antiquated, they're not based in data, and they're inhibiting our propensity to serve. Um, and a lot of that was personal. I had 3 kids on active duty, so I experienced some barriers where I was like, this really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And if I'm experiencing, others must be too. So did a little bit of that work. Was eventually asked to take over as the co-chair of the WIT. And so I led the team for about 3 years until it was disbanded earlier this year in January under the current administration's executive order on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's kind of how I've shifted into more of this public policy advocacy role. It marries up very nicely, kind of with my background. I've since separated active duty because, quite frankly, having 3 kiddos and a husband with a high ops tempo became a bit much. And I was offered a pretty great opportunity to be a civilian attorney at one of the military commands here local to me. And then later was offered another opportunity to do state government affairs full time, which is what I do now. I basically work with state legislatures on laws and policies that are friendly to service members and their families that reside in their states. So I tell people I'm a recovering attorney, and I utilize those skills, and they benefit, I think, very well my work in the advocacy space. Um, just because of what it takes to be an attorney. I know how to read the law. I know how to read policy. My intersection with women, peace, and security kind of started more when I was in the National Guard. So I'm in the Air National Guard now, still serving as an attorney, but really via the WIT got thrown into women, peace, and security because I realized that the women's initiative team is an internal women, peace, and security effort, right? Like one of the main themes of that policy framework is the meaningful participation of women in the government. And that's exactly what the WIT was doing. So it was just happenstance that actually my friend Allison Hartsfield, who's also in the Guard and a women, peace, and security, and I'll call it WPS expert, she randomly calls me and she's like, "Hey Sam, you need to come to this training." And I was like, "Oh gosh, another training." Allison, I don't think I need to come to another training. And she's like, "No, you need to come to this training." And I went, and it was like clear as day, the light bulb went off. So that's a little bit about me professionally. Like I said, I'm a servicewoman, veteran, in the Guard now, mom, sister, all of those things. So most, once you know that, can understand why I'm pretty passionate about a lot of these topics, particularly women's propensity to serve.
Love it. And thank you for that intro. Yes, you are juggling many hats, but I love your, the trajectory of your career and how, you started here and then you just kept kind of touching so many meaningful things along the way. And I appreciate what you said about how it all kind of ties back to this concept of women, peace, and security and this big kind of overarching concept that we're going to get a little bit into today. So the reason that we wanted to record this is that this week the current Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said in a tweet on X that he was dismantling and ending the Women, Peace, and Security Initiative that had been ruined by the Biden administration. And basically turned into what he referred to, I believe, as a woke agenda that was also fueled by a feminist agenda. And so we're going to get into, one, what women, peace, and security actually is and what it's done since it was brought into conception and creation in 2000, the different pillars of it, and, what women, peace, and security can truly do and some of the problems that it can solve and what it has done. And then also, with your help and guidance, kind of get into, is it even possible to just end this thing, this initiative that has touched, so many governments and so many conflicts and so many countries around the world? How do we just end it with a single tweet? Um, so you've touched on it a little bit with what you've already shared, but let's kind of share from both of our perspectives what women, peace, and security actually is. I'd love to kind of hear from you if you were asked by somebody what the definition of this concept is. How would you describe it?
It's a great question. It's actually when they ask us, the DoD has, when they were setting this capability up, they have a training that you go to. They have a 100 and 200 course, and actually, as the one in the 100 course, they make you come up with like your pitch, like what are you going to go back
Yeah.
to your unit and pitch it to your commander. And
Hmm.
it is a policy framework. But what I came out of that pitch with, because probably because I had been in a special operations unit for forever, right? And we talk everything capability. I'm like, it is an operational capability that can be leveraged by commanders to execute the mission, right? It may not be applicable in every scenario, but it's that on the shelf capability that you're looking at in peacekeeping operations, where you may want to pull it down and say, hey, I want that off the shelf capability and I'm going to implement it in this specific mission. So it's, in my mind, very operationalized, especially within the military and the DoD. And I think that the DoD, over the course of history, uh, there are a lot of really great examples, I believe, where we were using it already, and then we didn't even know that what we
Hmm.
were doing. So one of those that came to mind very quickly, um, when I was looking into this, right, were the cultural support teams and the female engagement teams during Afghanistan. I mean, that was very, very much, one could argue that that was a operation, that was women, peace, and security operationalized. We didn't call it that, clearly. And I understand, right, the CSTs and the FETs, there's, afterwards and how they were utilized and how those women were kind of integrated back into the force. There's a lot of consternation around that, but um, that's one of the big examples that pops out in my mind. So it's an operational capability. I think any commander would be naive not to want more capability, not to want more capabilities. And I wouldn't. This is the thing with the name, and I think you and I have talked about this a little bit too. Like women, peace, and security, it kind of gets a bad rap, especially here in the U.S. over the last 5 years, where we've seen diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of politicized pretty heavily. I'll throw this out there: it is not diversity, equity, inclusion at all. um, but the fact that women is in the title uh, confuses a lot of people, and makes them kind of go to that area. But really, that's not what it is. And it's not just about women and girls. It's looking at things through a gendered lens or a gendered perspective. In the Guard, right, that could be super relevant when we respond to domestic operations. If we're responding to an area of a state where there is a very heavy immigrant population of a certain culture, that's something we need to consider, right? Just like with the Title 10 forces going internationally, right? If you're responding to a place, to Asia, a place where you want to know culturally how men, women, boys, and girls um, live in that culture.
Hmm. Yep, I totally agree with you. And yeah, the irony of the statement from the SecDef, well, there was a lot of ironies in my opinion. One being that, the bipartisan legislature that the United States enacted in 2017 was a part of the Trump administration, but additionally that um, and I do believe he later said that the Biden administration ruined what the Trump administration started. But one, that it was enacted during the Trump administration. And then two, like you said, that, the concept of women, peace, and security has been an operational capability that the United States military has been using, whether they realize it or not. And having served personally in the cultural support teams and seeing not even just the operational capability that something like a cultural support team brings, but also the ability to forge partnerships with partner militaries, being able to, work with the women that are serving in those militaries or are on the ground and in some of the communities that we're trying to shape and influence. That's all women, peace, and security.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I mean, we saw it just as, you know, just recently with the Afghanistan withdrawal, right? We had Afghan women that flew over to the U.S. on aircraft that were pregnant. And this happened in some of the Operation Allies Refuge, the camps. We had women that needed uh, medical attention, and a lot of doctors in the military that were responding, a lot of in the National Guard who did a lot of the response are men. Well, culturally, an Afghan woman is not going to let a man look at her. She's just not. That's not how that works. And I'm oversimplifying that, but that was a gap. Uh, that had we had that women, peace, and security capability on the ground, we had those trained gender focal points and those gender advisors, that could have potentially been a factor that was raised very early on of, hey, we're going to need to consider how we're going to provide medical care for this specific demographic of people. Do we have enough women doctors? Uh, things of that nature, because, right, an Afghan woman may it, choose to just suffer and not receive medical care if the only option is to get it from a white male American man. Um,
Hmm.
and so there's examples that we've seen over time. I think it's so critical that you pointed out that this law was sponsored by two Republicans. Senator Marco Rubio is now the Secretary of State, was a huge proponent of it. And then Senator Kristen Noem, who I believe is a political appointee in the Trump administration. She's no longer in the legislature, but she was also a big proponent of it. I mean, it was President Trump, Ivanka Trump, did an international tour where she talked about the strides we were making with regards to women, peace, and security. So I think for women, peace, and security professionals, that's the really confusing thing, because there seems to have been this complete 180 from where the first Trump administration was at on this particular topic, to where we are now.
Agreed. And I'm happy that you brought up the point about the humanitarian aspect of women, peace, and security, because another component of the concept of women, peace, and security is bringing women into the conversation in times of humanitarian response. So whether it be, post conflict or whatever, having people who are trained to meet the unique needs of women post conflict when they're receiving aid. It's not something that was happening for a very long time. And when our world saw things like genocide and some of the most brutal conflicts that we've seen in recent history, that was part of the reason that advocates, advocated for something like this, bringing these conversations into the fold of the fact that women were disproportionately affected by some of these conflicts. And then, after the fact, when we're creating solutions and providing aid, we're still not delivering the solutions that we need to support them. And women or gender advisors need to be brought into the fold to help make sure that aid is reaching them and that we're meeting the needs of those people that we're serving.
Yeah, I mean, it was all born out of, conflicts like in Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda, the Balkans, Sierra Leone in the 1990s, where sexual violence was being used as a weapon of war, quite frankly. Um, and that's right. That's where it was all born. Like what you said, the follow-on 2000 UN Security Resolution. So it's sad that it's been what 20, 30 years and we're still, we have not arrived. And unfortunately, earlier this week, in my personal opinion, I think we've now seen a huge setback. I think the DoD, the fact that the law was signed into enacted in 2017 and we're in 2025 and it still was not fully enacted, right? And the Department of Defense is the lead for peace and security for the federal government. It was concerning to begin with, but we were making small strides. But this, I just I don't. I number one, I don't know. I think the unknown impacts within the DoD, but then because DoD was designated as the lead, what impacts are we going to see across the federal government, in diplomacy and other federal agencies that also have tasks to implement WPS.
Yep, absolutely. And the other concerning thing too, and I know that this is top of mind for you, given the work that you've done in sexual assault advocacy, is the fact that another component of this is educating and protecting people against gender-based violence. I mean, that's another reason that this was created was that militaries and policing organizations didn't know how to recognize, respond, and support people who were affected by gender-based violence. And we again know that in times of conflict, women are disproportionately affected by these things. And so, um, I think the real concerning thing here and the concerning thing that many of us have felt in 2025 is that having the word woman in an initiative is becoming politicized. And none of these things are political. And we've seen in many recent years the fact that we can all, on kind of all sides of the aisle, agree that this is a great thing and this is an important thing and a necessary thing in order to ensure a safer and more peaceful world, and in order to make better, more strategic decisions at all levels of government, intelligence, and humanitarian responses.
Yeah, I mean, in the data, these are not just conclusions we've come up with. The data shows that when women are involved in and have a seat at the table in decision making within the government, the country is more likely to be a stable government and to remain stable. Um, I think that's especially concerning given some folks' concern about the stability of our own government right now. Um, the perception that we are removing women or females from everything and those words being politicized is very concerning, nationally, and I would also say internationally. I think we're too early to tell right now because this only happened earlier this week. But I worry about what message does this send to all the other nations? Because in that same tweet, right, the United Nations was specifically called out, uh, to which we are still a party. The U.S. is still a party. But what message does this send to other countries, with regards to what we're prioritizing within our borders, and how we look at these issues? The National Guard has a very strong state partnership program where just about every state National Guard is partnered with a country or more than one country. During the kickoff of the Ukrainian conflict, right? This came out in the news. This is not a secret, but the Ukrainian president was communicating with the California adjutant general because they had met, because California is partnered with Ukraine as a state partner. So this this could potentially go far beyond just impacting this policy framework. What is it going to do to our other relationships internationally, and how countries look at us and whether they want to work with us or not?
Absolutely. Um, so let's, dive into Sam at a basic level, what can a Secretary of Defense do when it comes to things like this? What does Pete Hegseth have in his power, when it comes to influencing and changing, something like women, peace, and security?
I mean, so as a secretary, he has very broad authority and power. He was confirmed by the Senate, appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate to run the Department of Defense. So his authority is very broad. I will say that in his tweet, it does say that he will. I think it says the DoD will do what the statute requires. And if you go back and read the Women, Peace, and Security Act, unfortunately, it's very vague as to what those requirements are. And I think that's where the confusion is going to come into play, is what exactly does that mean, and what is the bare minimum that the DoD has to do. The tweet later on went to say that he was going to advocate. It seemed to indicate that he was going to advocate to the Hill to have the law repealed, which he can do as the secretary. There is an ongoing dialogue, right, between the DoD and the Hill on what laws are or are not necessary. Um, the other concerning thing is the budget, right? Things have to be not only authorized, but they have to be appropriated for. They have a budget through this FY, but if it's not appropriated for, next FY, what does that mean? So he has very broad. I mean, to get to your question, he has very broad authority um, to make calls like this. That's why he's in that job. Um, but some would also argue that he. I think it's too early to tell whether or not the law is being outright ignored. I mean, his tweet does say that we will do the bare minimum. What that looks like, we will see. And I think that's people's concerns, is like, what does that even mean? Uh, but as far as if he is not following federal law, just like some of the other things that we've seen happen over the course of years, when someone believes that a federal government representative or someone in the White House or someone, a legislator, isn't following the law, it usually results in some type of litigation where a court steps in. That's the role of the courts, is to interpret the law and determine exactly what the law requires. I don't know if anybody's going to take enough interest in this particular topic to go down that path, because litigation is obviously very expensive. We saw that recently with the transgender ban, where different nonprofits and advocacy groups took up the torch to do that, and that has since been paused because of the questionable legality of that ban. Perhaps we see something similar uh, in this regard, but again, that's going to take somebody carrying a whole lot, and then having quite a bit of funding to throw at the problem.
Hmm. Yep. Well, thank you for breaking that down. I know for me, and I think many of my fellow American citizens, we've been doing a lot of research in the last 6 months on like basic principles of U.S. government that are so hard sometimes to understand and unpack. And even though I've studied some of this stuff, sometimes I have to kind of take a pause and be like, okay, what is actually legal and what is actually possible? And there's been so many current events recently that have, I think made all of us kind of question, how far can this actually go? Like, what is actually possible? And I think there's some things that we still don't really know, and maybe we're still learning or they're still evolving to figure out how far they can go and how far that they will go. But
I oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the other thing is the Hill, right? The
Yeah.
because of the position he's in. I mean, he could be. He serves at the pleasure of the president. So clearly, the president, as we've seen the president do over the last couple of months, he can hire, fire uh, the people within his cabinet. That's when in the president's authority. But the Hill also has the ability to impeach people in positions like this. So uh, those are those are all options. I don't know which option or any. I mean, there's also a reality in which, you know, the DoD does the bare minimum, and the administration and the Hill are happy with that, and that is what it is. Like I said, I think that's we gotta get a little further down the road, unfortunately. And I know folks don't like that answer of like, oh, it's a wait and see game. As someone who's a very much a go doer and like a go getter, I don't like that answer either. But there is quite a bit of unknown right now. But the courts, the president, and the Hill, they all play a role in this. Back to your point of the very basics of U.S. government, right? The separation of powers and the checks and balances that our system is built upon.
Yep. Absolutely. So I want, the goal of discussions like this for me is always not to just call it out and, just make us feel even more kind of doom and gloom and like, oh my gosh, the world's burning and, I don't know what to do and there's nothing I can do. I'm all about giving people a call to action. And if people have listened this far, it's because they care about what we're talking about and they probably want to have a more active role in the things that are going on around them. And so I guess, I'd love for both of us to kind of share what our call to action would be. And for me personally, it's that people learn more about women, peace, and security, and they're then able to kind of advocate in their own way for what this really is and why this was created, and the fact that again, it's an operational capability. It is a concept that advocates on behalf of women and protects women. Um, it's it's a way to bring women into the fold for decision making, whether that be through governments or programs that make the world a more peaceful and safe place. There's the humanitarian component that we talked about, and all of these things are um, they're necessary, and they were born out of the fact that when they weren't around, we saw disproportionate violence against women and decisions that left them out of the fold in a way that was incredibly harmful. And so, not all of us are in positions right now where we can influence, legislature and some of us have taken off the uniform, um, but we can educate ourselves even in just our daily conversations with other people and for ourselves to make better decisions as we're engaging as citizens. And it's important, I think, when you see the name of something in the news, just to take a step back and really like dig into what something actually is and look at some of the case studies and some of the things that we've talked about, things that the DoD has already done or things that organizations around the world have done to help women in countries all over and support women all over the world, ways that women have been brought into government and brought into some of the most impactful organizations and made incredibly impactful effects on those organizations. So that would be my call to action, is just for whoever's listening to really understand that this is a huge huge concept at large that does so many different things, but it's, in my opinion, not at all what our current Secretary of Defense called it on social media. And I truly believe he's, um, you know, taking away the credibility, the importance, and the depth of something that took so many decades to build and was built for a reason. And so I hope our listeners, if they weren't already kind of close to what this concept is, can really um, understand it a little bit better and hopefully do some research on their own of some of the positive impacts that it's made.
Yeah, the education is critical because it does, like I said, get confused predominantly with diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially over the last 5 years. And Dr. Joan Fries Johnson Fries is that she leads in any presentation. She's fabulous, and she is like an expert on all things women, peace, and security. She always leads any presentation with that of what WPS is not. So I
Mm-hmm.
think clearly here, just based on the written word of that tweet, there appears to be a misunderstanding, and I would hope uh, that our current secretary, being a very I mean, he's an author, he served in some very prestigious positions, that he is open minded enough to be educated on what it really is, because taking that capability away from the Department of Defense really honestly gets after or deteriorates lethality. And lethality is one of his top three priorities for the department. And I think
Mm-hmm.
when it's painted in the right lens and explained in the right way, um, because he is you don't get to where he's at without being a smart person. Hopefully he sees that, right? Like, this makes the U.S. military less lethal, which is directly against what he wants as the secretary, right? And as a former
Mm-hmm.
service member, right? He served himself. But the other thing that I found before I get to my call to action, so right, we talk about WPS being about women, giving women a seat at the table, protecting women against gender-based violence, things like that. One of the executive orders published by the current administration was literally titled "Defending Women" and protecting women, and had like
Mm-hmm.
language all through it. And I believe the underlying kind
Mm-hmm.
of theme was related to it was equating protection of women, defending women, to the transgendered ban. And that's a whole nother can of worms. But I find it very interesting and intriguing that uh, a common theme through this current administration has been the protection of women and defending women, and a policy framework that is one of its stated goals is all of a sudden also now not part of, not in line with those goals. So I think it just shows another disconnect there. And who knows, right? Over 2 months, maybe they've shifted gears and they're focused on other things. But I would find that to be very probably not the case, given that that type of language was put in an executive order and has not been rescinded. Um, so it just is. It's hard to wrap your mind around. There's a lot of things with this particular tweet and this particular decision that are really hard to rationalize based upon what we know about the prior Trump administration, and then what we know about the current administration. So that's something I want to point out, because you pointed out that language specifically, and it made me connect the dots in my head.
No, I'm really glad that you did that. And I don't mean to cut you off, but it's so important with these conversations to not just say, here's where, you were wrong, or here's where you missed the mark, but hey, here's how, we can show that this, incredibly important policy actually connects back to what you say you're about, right? And, there are such few arguments I've found when it comes to politics where at the end of the day, you can't find a connection between two people who are disagreeing.
Mhm.
They are oftentimes trying to solve the same freaking problem, and they have very similar values when they're doing that, but they're arriving at conclusions in different ways, and they're, assuming things maybe about the other person that may or may not be true, but that's where the disconnect and that's where the conflict starts. And so I really love that you connected it back to some of the things that this administration and that the Secretary of Defense have taken a hard stance on and are passionate about.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that.
No problem. I mean, and I would hope anybody wants our military to be lethal. Like, I don't disagree with
Hell
him.
yeah,
Like,
I do.
I just, yeah, having, continuing to serve in it part time. And when I was a full timer, like, hell yeah, I want us to be lethal. Like, I know we're the
Yeah,
most, we're the most badass military in the US, and we need to stay that way.
yeah.
So, call to action. You know, for those that don't wear the uniform, because people that wear the uniform, right, they have some limitation. I wouldn't say limitations, but you have to do things a bit differently. But for those that are veterans, uh, who see the value in this and see the kind of the issue with what's going on, I mean, my recommendation would be to not only educate those around you, but to write your congressional representation. Where you're registered to vote, look up, who's your representative in the House, who's your senator. Send them a short note. Most of them have websites that you can send that stuff to. I promise you, because like that stuff doesn't go into the void. Having worked with a lot of federal staffers on the Hill, like they read that stuff. Um, and so let them know that you're not happy, with the decision. I would offer to write SecDef, but obviously his email is not public, and I don't know what it is, but he is on X, so potentially you could go on his X account and comment on his post. That's another option.
You'd be one of many, but maybe he'll see it.
You'll see he's also on LinkedIn. He has a LinkedIn profile. I'm sure he's on other social media sites. But let your congressional reps know, that your thoughts on this topic. That's probably one of the easiest ways that you can do that. And then for your service members, people who are still serving, you can still do that. Common misconception is you lose your First Amendment rights when you join the military. I think that's the furthest from the truth. There's actually a U.S. code that protects your ability to write your congressional representation on issues in your personal capacity. And what does that mean, right? Like, I'm not on this podcast talking like with a uniform on, Major Sam Sliney of the New Jersey Air National Guard. This is in my personal capacity. These are my personal thoughts and opinions. They don't reflect that of the Department of Defense or any of the services. You can do the same thing when you go to, when you write your congressional reps. If you're a service member, you can let them know what you're concerned about and why you're concerned. The Hill has the ability to send requests for information over to the department, and the department has an obligation to respond to those requests for information. That's a part of our U.S., the glorious thing about our government for checks and balances. So that would be what I would leave folks with. Get educated on the topic, educate others. And then if you are truly upset about what is going on, like many are, let people know that your voice does matter. Don't feel like your voice is so small that it doesn't matter. It really, really does. And the people that are elected to represent you, they do care. They care very much, and they like hearing from their constituents. So that would be what I would leave the group with. But first and foremost, educate yourself. One of the things I've seen, and I was just dealing with this today, like over the past couple months, a lot of things have been happening, very emotionally charged stuff, right? Like there have been days where I've just been pissed. Like I'm just pissed at what's happening. Be educated on something before you start talking to others about it. Don't let emotion fuel your words is another thing. And also be tolerant, right? We're not all going to agree on everything. I'm sure there's people out there knowing what they know about women pieces of security don't necessarily agree with everything that I've said or everything that you've said. But like you said, most times you can come to a common ground, and even if you can't, sometimes you just agree to disagree, and that is what it is. But make sure you do your homework before you out there spouting information. Make sure that it's accurate before you're doing that, because I've seen quite a bit of that of late, and it's really, really unfortunate, and it doesn't really help the dialogue.
Yeah. And I think get curious too. And that's something I could be better at is that once I make my mind up about something or once I'm passionate about it, I mean, whew, it's
Hmm.
pretty hard for me to let it go.
Oh yeah,
I
I'm the
mean,
same way.
I'm one of six kids. I'm the oldest girl. I was raised to be stubborn as hell. And
Hmm.
so um it's tough when, and on a serious note, like, we're talking about gender-based violence. We're talking about the inclusion of women. We're talking about, protecting women. And then, there's a whole other like slew of things that have happened recently that they are close to my heart. And it's
Hmm.
hard to not get upset and to not get angry. And to assume that, if someone doesn't want this thing to exist anymore, like they have evil intentions or they're evil at heart. And breaking down like, okay, what does this person actually want? What are
Hmm.
they trying to do? What are they trying to solve? And that's not to say that there aren't people out there, and there aren't people out there in positions of power who don't have the best intentions, in my opinion, and are not making decisions based on facts. But there are a lot of people out there who are, and I think if you get curious about what they're trying to do and the place that they're coming from and um the emotions that they have and the ideas that they're trying to represent, you can have a way better time, one, sleeping at night, and then two, getting to the root of some of these things and helping influence them in a productive way.
Yeah, being strategic, right? We talk about that in the military all the time. Being strategic, operational preparation of the environment, right? Like taking in everything so that when you go in for your mission, you kind of know, this is how things are going to go down. Having all the intelligence beforehand. I'll tell you, like, I've listened to every podcast that the secretary has done and read his books because I want to understand how his brain works because
Hmm.
I know, not that this will ever happen, but if it did, and I got to sit down with him to like talk to him about all of these things that, my initial reaction when there was some changes was anger and, I was upset. I want to be able to go in and have that strategic dialogue with him. And like you, I am also very stubborn. He is going to see my side because I know the data and I know the information is goes directly towards his priority of lethality,
Hmm.
and that can be really hard to do. I'm not going to lie; it's it's been challenging for me over the last couple of months, but um, that's what the military has, how the military teaches us to think, and I think it's important to draw on those skill sets. Um, and approach this just like we would approach the planning and preparation for any other mission.
Hmm. Yep. I love that. Well, Sam, I know that it's getting late and you got to be a superwoman again tomorrow. So I really appreciated this conversation. I'm hopeful that it's, one of many that we can get into as the world continues to change and evolve. And, I'm hopeful that as, our conversations develop and things continue to take fold, it'll feel a little less scary and a little less chaotic. And I think that conversations like this help to make it feel a little bit less like things are out of control or there's nothing I can do or whatever. There is so much that you can do. And, I'm thankful for people like you and leaders like you who can help us kind of see things as they are and bring those facts to the table. So, really appreciate your time and just sincerely thank you for being on tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and of course, I look forward to future dialogues, as I'm sure we're going to have lots of topics to talk about.
Yep, absolutely.
The Women in the Arena podcast is powered by Iron Butterfly Media, a production company committed to honoring the lives of women who have had an unseen and outsized impact on our world. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you have a woman who you would like to nominate as a guest, please shoot us a message on our social media platforms. Be sure to subscribe and follow on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. See you next time.